Today's reading is called The Redemption of Esme, and it is a twist on the Cinderella story. It is an original story that was written by my dear friend Charles Henderson, as I wanted to wear my tiara given to me by my wonderful sister in law, Courtney. I hope you enjoy The Redemption of Esme. It includes a ghost, as I felt appropriate for the season. The Redemption of Esme. Once upon a time, there lived a happy family in the south of France. The young blonde woman watched as her husband rapidly came down the steps from the doorway. He looked toward the large swing in which she lounged. Esme, he said, the Duke Aldo approaches with a party. We must be ready to meet them. Esme stood up, and her long blonde hair filled out as the wind caught it. I will get the servants preparing food and drink immediately, she said, and she quickly walked into the manor house. It didn't take long for the servants to prepare a refreshing plate of fruit and cheese with a bottle of wine from the cellar to wash the dust of the road from the Duke's lips. By the time her husband led the Duke into the foyer, everything was ready. My Lord Aldo, Esme said in a gentle voice as she curtsied. You are as lovely as ever, he replied with a bow. With every visit, I grow more and more jealous of my friend and vassal, he replied with a gracious tone, of one who is truly thankful. May I introduce my guest, the Lady Odette? It is upon her request that I am making this journey. Please, my lord, Esme said, let us refresh ourselves before discussing business. I have had fruit, cheese, and wine set out for us. My dear Esme, the Duke said, you are truly a blessing. The Duke looked at the two of them. Never in my life have I seen a better example of true love than I see in you two. The four of them sat on the benches next to a heavy wooden table covered with a plain white tablecloth. Four porcelain plates and four metal goblets sat waiting for them. In the middle of the table was a variety of sliced cheese, along with sliced apples, sliced pears, and cherries. After several minutes, the Duke stopped eating. I have tarried long enough, and soon must return home. My dear Roland, I would ask a boon of thee. My youngest brother has died, and he has left his wife and two daughters. They have little money and no home. I would ask that you take them into your home, that you would care for and provide for them. Roland bowed slightly while still seated. Your charges shall be my honored guest, my lord. Then I shall take my leave, the Duke said, rising. The hospitality of your home is a model that all France should follow. After Baron Roland had led the Duke back to his horse, he called for Serge, the chief butler. Serge, Roland said, please prepare the suite by the North Hall for Lady Odette and her daughters. Right away, my lord, Serge said, and he walked over to where Lady Odette held two babies. Right this way, madam. Would you like one of the maids to help with the babies? Esme couldn't hear the reply as the two moved off. Several men carried the belongings to the suite. Once the room was clear, Esme turned to Roland. Who is that woman? Why do you two look at each other as if you know one another? Roland smiled at her. I grew up with her. We were both wards of Duke Aldo's father. Seeing his wife's concerned face, he continued, we were only children playing foolish childhood games. Nothing you should ever worry about. The dread in Esme's heart was heavier than Roland's assurance. Hoping she was wrong, she tried to push the feelings from her heart. As summer passed into autumn, Esme tried to ignore when Odette would stare at Roland, or when she would cast daggers with her eyes at Esme. Over and over, she would repeat to herself that she was imagining it. As autumn passed to winter snows, Esme forgot about Odette. Morning sickness and a slight bulge in her belly spoke louder than her troubles. After one rough bout of being sick, Esme walked back into the bedchamber and washed her mouth with water. Are you ill, my love? Roland asked. I can fetch a doctor. Esme smiled. I don't need a doctor. In a few months, I will need a midwife. Roland looked puzzled for a moment before his mind understood his words. A baby? You're pregnant? Esme smiled and laughed at her husband. She nodded, unable to speak. Roland rushed to her and swept her up in his arms. This is the second happiest day of my life. What was the happiest? Esme asked. Roland grinned. The day you accepted my request to marry me. Esme blushed. Roland put her down. We must celebrate. I will have a steward arrange a feast and a ball to celebrate. Don't you want to wait until the child is born? We will not. We will know not if the child is a boy or a girl. How can we introduce the unborn child? After the birth, there will be too much to do, he answered. Children require a lot of care. Let us be festive now while we have the time. Esme laughed again and embraced her husband. As you wish, my lord. All of the castle staff took to the celebration with gusto. Even sour-mouthed Odette could be seen hanging decorations in the great hall. Rooms were prepared for the guests to sleep, and the castle pantry was overflowing with food for guests that would arrive. It was determined that the first day of spring would be the perfect day for the celebration. Finally, the day had arrived. Noblemen and ladies filtered into the castle and found tables to sit and chat while enjoying fruit and snacks. Roland and Esme sat in cushioned chairs at the back of the hall, and each guest arrived. The first they first made time to congratulate the happy couple and comment on the size of Esme's belly. As the last of the guests gathered, Esme looked troubled. Have you seen Odette? She asked Roland. No, I haven't, Roland answered. He waved Serge over. Have you seen the Lady Odette? The chief butler nodded. Yes, my lord. The excitement was too much for her. She is in her chambers with her daughters. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Roland answered. I hope she feels better. Roland stood and cleared his throat. In moments, the room quieted. I would like to thank all of our friends that time took of their time to help us celebrate our firstborn. We have worked hard to make this evening memorable, one with great food followed by great music and dancing. Let the celebration begin. The small group of musicians off to one side began to play, while servants swept into the hall bearing plates of food and fresh wine. The quiet of the room rapidly turned into a buzz of conversations as everyone began to eat the first course of the meal. As she ate, Esme began to feel tired. She didn't want to leave the celebration as she was enjoying herself. Instead, she leaned against her husband. She didn't realize it when she fell asleep. Esme found herself walking down the hall. She was confused. How did she get here? She heard Odette's voice from behind a door. Thinking that Odette could help her, she ran to the door and opened it. Odette was leaning over a cauldron that bubbled with something that produced a grayish smoke. The weird scene made Esme's voice catch in her throat. Odette was intent on her task and didn't see Esme. And the last ingredient, blood of an innocent. Odette held the hand of her oldest daughter over the cauldron and quickly slashed her hand with a knife. When her blood dropped into the cauldron, the smoke changed from gray to a sickening green. Esme screamed all of a sudden. Pain erupted below her stomach. Odette turned to her and laughed the cackle of the devil. Now nothing will keep me from taking your place with Roland. I will know true love. Esme awoke. She was laying down, and people were running all over the place. She could feel Roland's warm hand, some reassuring words that she would be okay. Esme knew that she wouldn't. She felt a tug on her belly before darkness closed around her. Once again, Esme woke. She was no longer in pain. She sat up with a large stretch and yawned. Esme noticed that her belly was no longer swollen, and she checked herself over. She noticed that she was still in the gown that she wore to the celebration. Turning her legs off the bed, she stood. The night was pitch black. It must be a cloudy night. Esme reached over to light a candle. She paused, confused, as her hand passed right through it. Scared, she called out for Roland. There was no answer. She ran for the door. Her hand passed through the door handle. With desperate tears, she raised her fist to beat on the door while crying out Roland's name. Her hands passed straight through the wood. The door opened. Odette stood in the doorway, her face screwed up in a vicious smile. Roland can't hear you. Only I can. What happened to me? Esme asked. I'm surprised you didn't figure it out, Odette replied. I have murdered you so that I could steal your husband. Her face turned from a smile to something resembling pity. Your love for your husband and child is keeping you here when you should be gone. My baby! Esme screamed. Odette smiled a vile smile. Your husband named her Cinderella. Her hair was the color of ash when she was born. She paused. The nursemaids are caring for her. Pity she will never know her mother. Odette turned to leave the room. Good night. The door shut with the echoes of Odette's cruel laugh. Esme collapsed on the floor in tears. She was a ghost, and the only person who could see her was her killer. The two people she loved the most forever beyond her reach. She would be forced to watch them grow without her. Esme wasn't sure how long she lay on the floor before standing up again. Knowing her true nature, she didn't even try to open the door. Instead, she simply walked through it. The castle was in mourning. The servants walked around, their heads held low and wore black. She walked to the nursery. There she saw her sleeping baby. Her hair was as ash blonde. Even though she knew her baby couldn't hear her, she sang a song she would have sang if she had been alive. Baby, baby in my arms, you will always be the center of my heart. Our lives will intertwine like the branches of a love vine. She sat there until Cinderella began to cry. In a moment, a nurse came into the room to care for the infant. Esme ran out in tears. The fact that she couldn't care for her own daughter left her in tears. Esme instinctively ran to her husband. He was in the study. His head was in his hands. She could hear the muffled cry from his mouth. The sounds were filled with grief. Tears ran down her face as she stared at him, his grief ripping her heart out. Turning from the room, she fled. From the room, she fled. She ran to an unused closet into an empty room. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't handle being on Earth and unable to communicate with those she loved. She was trapped. The only person who could release her seemed to enjoy her pain. She wasn't sure how long she had hidden. Time seemed to flow differently now that she was dead. The sounds of bells roused her from her lethargy. She walked out of the room and followed the sounds. She wished with all her heart that she hadn't. As she walked into the main hall, she saw Odette in a wedding gown, standing by her husband's side. The priest was pronouncing them man and wife. Her eyes filled with tears of anguish. She fled once again to her hiding place. How long she hid, she didn't know. Time passed differently after death. Her awareness was awakened by the sound of footsteps. She knew from the sounds on the step, who it was. Why do you torture me so? She asked. Have you not already taken enough, everything from me? Because it gives me pleasure, Esme, Odette responded. I wanted to give you a chance to say goodbye to Roland. Even now he is on his deathbed. Esme soared up from the floors of the manor. racing to her old bedroom, her heart filled with dread and fear. As she passed through the door, she could see her daughter, now a young woman, kneeling at the edge of the bed. Muffled cries came from her covered face. Esme pulled her eyes off of her daughter to the man laying in the bed. His once thick, dark hair was thin and gray. His once strong chin was now weak and frail. She tried to place her hand on his arm, and it slid through it. She had forgotten. The space where her heart once was felt hollow. She was unable to touch the ones she loved. Odette's cruel laughter pierced her ears, driving knives of despair even deeper. Once again she fled. Esme sobbed, paused as she felt a touch. Looking up, she saw a fairy with a glowing gossamer wings. The fairy's mouth didn't move, but her musical voice sounded in Esme's ears. You poor lost soul, your pain is so great that it hurts everything around you. I feel such sorry for you. I can't save you or end your pain. I can give you the power of the fairy for a time, an opportunity to set things right so that you might rest. There is but one rule. You may not use your power to harm anyone. The fairy paused. Hush your tears and take care of the one you love. Esme looked down. A wand lay on the floor. She bent down and picked it up. With the touch of the wand, she understood. She had the power to make an illusion reality for a quarter of a day and no more. A commotion in the main floor of the house drew attention. She floated up to see Odette holding a proclamation. Well, well, the prince is holding a ball in 5 days hence. He intends to find a wife. Odette looked at her daughters. I am sure that one of you will be a suitable bride. I shall spend the last of our money to make sure of it. Odette brought out a pouch of coins. Go to the dressmaker and get the most expensive dresses you can find. Cinderella, you will make the alterations. I have other preparations to make. Esme ignored the scramble of Marie and Belle. Instead, she followed Odette down to the basement. Odette unlocked the door and walked into a room. She locked the door behind her. Esme simply floated through the door. In the room, a cauldron bubbled green goo. Odette pulled a couple of combs from her pocket. She dropped them into the cauldron. Going to a rack, she extracted many powders and liquids, and even what looked like eyeballs. She stirred each into the cauldron. She smirked. In 3 days' time, the potion will have soaked into the combs. Their scent will make every man desire the woman that wear them. My youngest will marry the prince, and my oldest a duke, and I will live my remaining days in luxury. Hate burned deep in Esme's heart. She wished that she could use her magic to cause Odette even a fraction of the pain that Esme felt, but she knew that she couldn't. But another idea glimmered in her mind. She might not be able to harm Odette, but maybe she could keep her plots from succeeding. Esme retreated to a quiet spot to think. The day of the ball had come. Maria and Belle labored over their hair and makeup while Cinderella altered the dresses. Tears rolled down her face, knowing that her sisters would find husbands while she stayed and toiled. Odette swept in with a golden comb in each hand. She handed one to each daughter. Don't lose these. Do not share them nor give them away. They are very special. Yes, Mommy, both girls said. Cinderella watched from the window as the carriage her sisters were in rolled away. Her face full of disappointment. Odette Odette gloated over the pain she had caused and went to rest in the sitting room. When Odette was out of earshot, Esme cast her first spell. She turned herself into a fairy godmother like the kind that she used to read about in fairy tales. This change gave her a voice. Fret not, child, she said. Cinderella jumped at the sound of Esme's voice. Who's there? Now, hush. We don't want to wake your stepmother, Esme replied. I am your fairy godmother. I am here to correct a wrong that was done to you and give you the opportunity for true love. Cinderella's voice was quiet but excited. True love would give her a way out of this horrible house and out from under Odette's thumb. How? You are going to be the most beautiful girl at the ball, Esme said. But I don't have a dress. My hair isn't done. I don't own makeup, Cinderella protested. Even if I had those things, I have no way to get there, and I don't have any nice shoes. Calm, child, Esme said. I will take care of everything shortly. However, there is one thing that you must promise me. Anything, Cinderella replied. You must leave the ball by the stroke of midnight. No later. No later, Esme said. The magic will wear off not long after. Cinderella nodded. I understand. Very well. Let us go to the courtyard, Esme said. She flapped her wings and flew near to Esme. It felt weird flying, and it felt weird being only 6 inches tall. Her daughter towered over her like a giant. This is good enough, she said as they stood in the drive. First the dress. Twirl, my dear. As Cinderella spun, sparkling cloth shot from her wand. As the cloth touched Cinderella's, her homespun dress was converted into a sleek and stylish evening gown that shimmered in the sun. Now for jewelry. A sparkling necklace, bracelet, and tiara of silver and diamond appeared on Cinderella. And for the final touch, the shoes. Light gathered at Cinderella's feet, and when it faded, she wore 2 glass slippers with 4-inch heels. Cinderella looked at herself in the reflection in the window. I never dreamed I could be so pretty. Trust me, child, Esme said. You will be the most noticed person at the ball. And now for your ride. Waving her wand, a pumpkin that was decorating the front of the house transformed itself into a carriage of dark wood and gold. 3 mice came out of the field. 2 became horses that would draw the carriage, while the third became a driver. Finally, 2 small lizards became the footmen that would ride on the outside of the carriage and escort Cinderella to the ball. Go, my child, have the time of your life, and know that the dark days will soon be over, Esme said, as Cinderella climbed up to the carriage and it pulled away. Esme waited. She kept watching the road. Her nerves got worse the closer it got to midnight. Finally, close to 1 hour after midnight, Cinderella quietly walked in. Her homespun dress was covered in mud. What happened, child? Esme said with concern written all over her face. It was the best time ever. I have never heard music that was so beautiful, tasted food so wonderful, or dreamed of dancing with the prince himself. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice the time until the clock struck 12. Then I sprinted to the door, and I was halfway home before the carriage became a pumpkin again, Cinderella reported. But now I am back. Here I hoped I have changed. My life would change. But now I am back. Here I hoped my life would change. And it will, Esme said. Now for sleep. One weird thing, Cinderella said as she walked toward her room. All the magic disappeared except for the glass slipper. The glass slipper. One fell off as I ran, and I still have the other. Esme watched over her. She felt as if she had failed her daughter. As the sun rose, she could hear the sounds of the horses and the carriage wheels. She floated to the window and looked out. It was the prince's carriage riding by. She quickly pulled out her wand and swung it, causing the wheels of the carriage to break and the carriage to stop. Esme flew to Cinderella's room. Quick, quick, wake up! Go and answer the door. It is your prince. Cinderella ran from her room and yanked open the front door. The prince stood there. From behind her, she could hear Odette's voice. Please come in and rest yourself, your majesty. What, pray tell, brings you out this far? I seek the beauty that captured my heart at the ball. I intend to make her my wife, he replied. She was wearing a glass slipper. Well, Odette said, almost purring, both my daughters were at the ball. I shall call them for you. As Maria and Belle entered the sitting room, they were both still wearing their combs. Esme could see his face change as Odette's enchantment began to work its evil magic. Esme called out loud enough for Odette to hear. It is time for your magic smells as black as your heart. It is time that your magic smells as black as your heart. Esme swung her wand at the combs, began spewing out stench as bad as an angry skunk. Odette and her daughter ran from the room. Cinderella pulled a glass slipper from her apron pocket. The slipper was mine, your majesty. The prince knelt and pulled a glass slipper from his cloak. He slipped the slipper on her foot. It was a perfect fit. You are the beauty that captured my heart. My heart aches as I cannot take a commoner as a wife. I'm not a commoner, your majesty, she replied. My name is Cinderella. I am the daughter of the Baron Roland, the late lord of the manor. The prince's eyes lit with joy. Cinderella, daughter of the Baron Roland? Would you consent to be my wife? The prince asked. With all my heart, she replied. Esme closed her eyes, happy that she had helped her daughter. When she opened them again, she could see Roland. He was looking at her with his heart in his eyes. Come, Esme, he said. Heaven is desolate without you in it. Esme took his hand and left the world behind. The end.